The Jeff Chandler mystery is finally solved and isn't good. For decades, Jeff Chandler has been remembered as the silver-haired, deep-voiced actor who brought Cochise to life in Broken Arrow and starred in dozens of westerns and war films throughout the 1950s. His death at age 42 in 1961 has long been described as a tragic but simple medical complication, a routine back surgery gone wrong. But this sanitized narrative conceals a far more disturbing reality that Universal Pictures and Hollywood power brokers worked diligently to keep hidden from the public. Today, we're revealing the troubling truth behind Jeff Chandler's premature death, a complex web of medical negligence, studio exploitation, personal secrets, and institutional cover-ups that transforms our understanding of this Hollywood star's final chapter. What you're about to learn isn't just a minor correction to the historical record, it's a complete reframing of a death that should never have happened and the dark forces that closed ranks to hide the truth. The real story of Jeff Chandler's final days reveals not just a medical tragedy, but a damning indictment of a Hollywood system that used its stars until they broke, then quietly disposed of the evidence. The official story of Jeff Chandler's death, a simple complication from routine back surgery, has never fully explained how a physically robust 42-year-old star could die from what should have been a standard medical procedure. This sanitized version of events falls apart under closer scrutiny, revealing a disturbing pattern of negligence, cover-ups, and studio politics that contributed to his premature death. To truly understand what happened to Jeff Chandler, we need to examine 5 critical aspects of his final days that completely transform our understanding of this tragedy. Elements that have been deliberately obscured for decades, but that together solve the mystery of how one of Hollywood's most reliable leading men could be gone so suddenly, and why the full truth was never told.
You didn't know what you were doing.
I didn't know what to do.
Did you ask anyone what you should do?
No, I was afraid to.
1. His death was called a routine surgery, but it was anything but. In early 1961, Jeff Chandler was at a career crossroads. At 42, the silver-haired star had built a solid reputation as one of Hollywood's most dependable leading men, particularly in westerns and war films, where his imposing 6'4" frame and deep, resonant voice made him a natural fit for authority figures and military leaders. Though never quite reaching the superstar status of contemporaries like Gregory Peck or Burt Lancaster, Chandler had established himself as a reliable box office draw for Universal Pictures, appearing in a steady stream of profitable, if not always prestigious productions. What fans didn't know was that years of physically demanding roles had taken a significant toll on Chandler's body, particularly his back. The actor had been suffering from chronic pain due to a herniated disc, likely the cumulative result of stunts, action sequences, and the grueling production schedules that studio contracts demanded in that era. By spring 1961, the condition had deteriorated to the point where surgery became necessary. When Chandler checked into Culver City Hospital for the operation in May 1961, both his management and the studio publicly described it as a routine procedure, a minor inconvenience that would require a short recovery before the actor could return to his busy filming schedule. This characterization was consistent with Hollywood's longtime practice of downplaying any health issues affecting valuable stars, protecting both their virile public image and the financial investments their films represented. The surgery to repair Chandler's herniated disc took place on May 13, 1961. What happened next would eventually contradict every aspect of the routine procedure narrative. Within hours of the operation, Chandler began experiencing severe internal bleeding, a hemorrhage so significant that it sent him into shock. Emergency measures were taken, but the bleeding proved difficult to control, initiating a medical crisis that would continue for days. They said it was routine, but it left him bleeding to death in silence, observed one nurse who was present during this period, but later spoke only on condition of anonymity. This assessment captures the stark contrast between the public characterization of Chandler's surgery and the life-threatening reality that unfolded behind hospital doors. As Chandler's condition deteriorated, doctors performed multiple follow-up surgeries in desperate attempts to locate and stop the hemorrhaging. These additional operations, far from the single routine procedure described to the public, placed enormous stress on Chandler's system, leading to further complications, including blood clots and infections. The true cause of the bleeding was not publicly disclosed at the time, but the autopsy would later reveal a shocking surgical error. During the initial back operation, the surgeon had accidentally nicked a major artery. This critical mistake, rather than any unavoidable complication, was the direct cause of Chandler's subsequent medical crisis, a fact that transforms our understanding of his death from unfortunate medical bad luck to the result of a serious surgical error. For nearly 3 weeks, Chandler fought for his life in the hospital, undergoing multiple blood transfusions and additional surgeries. Throughout this period, studio publicity representatives continued to issue optimistic statements about his condition, describing complications as minor setbacks and assuring fans of his imminent recovery. These statements directly contradicted the grave reality of Chandler's deteriorating condition, a deliberate misrepresentation designed to protect both the hospital's reputation and the studio's interests in Chandler's upcoming projects. On June 17, 1961, after 36 days of what was described as routine treatment, Jeff Chandler died from complications related to the massive internal bleeding triggered by his initial surgery. He was 42 years old, in what should have been the prime of his career and life. The official cause of death was listed as blood poisoning due to circulatory complications, a technically accurate but deliberately vague description that obscured the surgical error at the root of the tragedy. This carefully worded explanation helped maintain the narrative that Chandler's death, while tragic, resulted from unavoidable medical complications rather than negligence. What makes this misrepresentation particularly significant is how thoroughly it has shaped public understanding of Chandler's death for decades. The routine surgery gone wrong narrative has persisted in biographies, film histories, and cultural memory, concealing the disturbing reality that one of Hollywood's most physically commanding leading men essentially bled to death due to a preventable surgical mistake.
So if they're going to desert, let them desert now. At least I won't be any worse off than I was before.
2. His surgeon was sued, but the settlement was suspiciously quiet. In the aftermath of Jeff Chandler's shocking death, his family took action that contradicted the public narrative of an unavoidable medical tragedy. Chandler's ex-wife, Marjorie, with whom he had maintained an amicable relationship and who remained the mother of his 2 daughters, filed a malpractice lawsuit against Dr. Julian Hoffman, the surgeon who performed the fatal operation, and the Culver City Hospital where the procedure took place. This legal action represented the first public challenge to the sanitized version of events surrounding Chandler's death. The lawsuit explicitly alleged negligence during the initial surgery, claiming that Dr. Hoffman had failed to exercise proper care when operating near major blood vessels, directly causing the arterial damage that led to Chandler's fatal hemorrhaging. What happened next reveals much about Hollywood's power to manage potentially damaging narratives. Despite the serious allegations and the high profile of the deceased star, the lawsuit received remarkably little media attention. Major entertainment publications either ignored the story entirely or buried it in back pages with minimal detail, a stark contrast to the extensive coverage typically given to any development involving a star of Chandler's stature. This muted coverage wasn't accidental. According to several industry insiders from that period, Universal Pictures, which had significant financial interests in protecting Chandler's image and legacy, deployed its considerable legal and public relations resources to minimize publicity around the lawsuit. Studio representatives reportedly approached major publications with both implicit and explicit pressure to downplay the story, leveraging Universal's substantial advertising budgets and access to other studio stars as powerful incentives for editorial cooperation. Hollywood didn't want a scandal. They wanted silence, noted one former studio publicist familiar with the case. This observation captures the fundamental motivation behind the coordinated effort to minimize public awareness of the lawsuit, protecting not just Dr. Hoffman and the hospital, but the larger system of which they were part. The most telling development came when the lawsuit was settled out of court in late 1962, roughly a year after Chandler's death. The terms of this settlement were sealed by agreement of all parties, preventing any public disclosure of the compensation amount or specific acknowledgments of fault. This confidentiality agreement effectively buried the most damning details of Chandler's medical treatment, shielding both the doctor and hospital from public accountability. What little information leaked about the settlement suggested it was substantial, rumored to be in the high 6 figures, a significant sum for medical malpractice in the early 1960s. This figure implied recognition of serious negligence, as nominal settlements for nuisance lawsuits typically involved much smaller amounts. The substantial payment effectively functioned as an admission of fault. though one carefully hidden from public view. The sealed nature of the settlement served multiple interests simultaneously. For Chandler's family, it provided financial compensation without the emotional toll of a protracted public trial. For Dr. Hoffman and the hospital, it prevented damaging testimony from becoming part of the public record. For Universal Pictures, it maintained the marketability of Chandler's existing films while avoiding association with medical negligence. Most significantly, the quiet resolution prevented the case from establishing a precedent that might have encouraged greater scrutiny of medical care provided to other Hollywood stars, a development that would have threatened the cozy relationship between studios, medical providers, and the press that had long protected Hollywood's interests. This coordinated effort to minimize the lawsuit's visibility and implications represents a classic example of Hollywood's power to shape not just entertainment, but the very reality presented to the public. By controlling the narrative around Chandler's death and the subsequent legal proceedings, the industry effectively rewrote history, transforming a case of apparent medical negligence into a footnote barely remembered in discussions of Chandler's life and career. The success of this narrative management is evident in how rarely the malpractice lawsuit appears in biographical information about Chandler. Most accounts of his life either omit any mention of the legal action or reference it only briefly without exploring its implications. This selective amnesia serves as a stark reminder of Hollywood's historical ability to control information and protect its institutional interests, even at the expense of truth and accountability.
Because they never learn. Learn? You can't do it alone. You have to have the people with you.
3. He should have survived, but was reportedly denied emergency blood. Beyond the initial surgical error that caused Jeff Chandler's internal bleeding, evidence suggests a series of subsequent hospital failures may have contributed significantly to his death, failures that have received even less public attention than the original malpractice. These additional medical shortcomings transformed what might have been a recoverable injury into a fatal cascade of complications. According to multiple sources familiar with Chandler's treatment, including 2 nurses who worked at Culver City Hospital during his stay, the actor's initial hemorrhaging should have been survivable with proper emergency response. The critical factor in managing arterial bleeding is the immediate availability of blood transfusions and a trained team ready to administer them, resources that were reportedly delayed during the critical early hours of Chandler's crisis. He walked in for a back problem. He never walked out, noted one of these nurses, who requested anonymity even decades later due to professional concerns. This stark assessment highlights the fundamental tragedy of Chandler's case, a relatively common medical procedure that spiraled into a fatal outcome through a series of preventable errors. The most serious allegation involves the hospital's blood bank and transfusion protocols. According to accounts from hospital staff, when Chandler began hemorrhaging severely in the hours following his surgery, the emergency response was hampered by inadequate preparation of blood supplies and the absence of a fully staffed transfusion team. These critical resources should have been standing by for any major surgery, particularly one involving operations near major blood vessels. This delay reportedly allowed Chandler's condition to deteriorate from serious but manageable to critical and eventually irreversible. The body's response to severe blood loss includes a cascade of physiological changes that become increasingly difficult to reverse after certain thresholds are crossed, thresholds that might never have been reached with immediate and adequate transfusion response. Compounding this initial failure were reported issues with cross-matching blood types and ensuring proper compatibility, vital precautions that become more challenging under emergency conditions, but are essential to preventing transfusion reactions. Some accounts suggest that in the rush to address Chandler's crisis, these protocols weren't followed with appropriate care, potentially introducing additional complications that further compromised his recovery. The hospital's alleged unpreparedness extended beyond just blood supplies to the availability of specialist surgeons needed to repair vascular damage. The surgical team that performed Chandler's initial back operation reportedly lacked immediate access to vascular surgery specialists, experts who might have been able to repair the arterial damage more effectively if brought in during the earliest stages of the crisis. What makes these failures particularly significant is that they represent systemic issues rather than just the initial mistake by an individual surgeon. While Dr. Hoffman's error in nicking the artery initiated the crisis, the hospital's reported inability to respond effectively represents an institutional failure that substantially diminished Chandler's chances of survival. These allegations never became part of the official record due to the sealed settlement of the malpractice lawsuit. Had the case proceeded to trial, these aspects of Chandler's treatment would likely have been examined in open court, potentially exposing serious deficiencies in the hospital's emergency protocols. The confidential resolution effectively shielded these systemic problems from public scrutiny, preventing both accountability and potential reforms that might have benefited future patients. The pattern of institutional failure followed by institutional concealment reveals a troubling reality about medical care for Hollywood stars in this era. While celebrities often received preferential treatment in terms of comfort and privacy, the pressure to manage publicity and protect reputations sometimes compromised the quality and transparency of their medical care. In Chandler's case, this dynamic may have contributed not just to his death, but to the subsequent obscuring of its preventable nature.
Take your women, your children, your horses, your weapons. Leave our territory.
For T, cross-dressing rumors weren't just gossip and may have destroyed his career. One of the most persistent but rarely discussed aspects of Jeff Chandler's life involves rumors about his private preferences, specifically allegations that he enjoyed cross-dressing in women's clothing. While such personal choices would be considered far less sensational today, in the rigidly conformist entertainment industry of the 1950s, even rumors of such behavior could be career-ending for a male star, particularly one known for hyper-masculine roles. These rumors remained largely in the realm of Hollywood gossip until after Chandler's death, when they received unexpected public confirmation from an unlikely source, Esther Williams. The swimming champion-turned-actress had briefly dated Chandler in the mid-1950s, and in her 1999 autobiography, The $1,000,000 Mermaid, she made the startling claim that she had discovered Chandler's penchant for wearing women's clothing during their relationship. According to Williams, she once arrived unexpectedly at Chandler's apartment and found him dressed in a red wig, high heels, and a flowered chiffon dress. In her account, this discovery immediately ended their relationship, as she found it incompatible with her expectations for a romantic partner. Williams's revelation, coming decades after Chandler's death when he could neither confirm nor deny her account, thrust this previously whispered aspect of his life into public discussion. What makes this personal detail relevant to understanding Chandler's final years is how knowledge of his private preferences may have affected his professional standing in the period leading up to his fatal surgery. According to several industry insiders from that era, rumors about Chandler's cross-dressing had begun circulating within Hollywood circles years before Williams' public confirmation, potentially reaching studio executives and casting directors who controlled his career opportunities. He played warriors and cowboys, but Hollywood wouldn't tolerate a man who wore silk at home, observed one casting director who worked during Chandler's era. This assessment captures the fundamental contradiction between Chandler's screen persona, the epitome of rugged masculinity in films like Away All Boats and 10 Seconds to Hell, and his private life as described in these accounts. Evidence suggests that these rumors may have begun affecting Chandler's career trajectory in the years immediately preceding his death. After a steady rise throughout the early and mid-1950s, Chandler's roles began showing a subtle but noticeable decline in quality and prominence around 1959 to 60. While still working regularly, he was increasingly assigned to less prestigious projects and seeing fewer opportunities for the kind of significant leading roles that had previously defined his career. This professional downturn coincided with the period when rumors about his private life were allegedly spreading within industry circles. While Universal Pictures maintained Chandler's contract and continued casting him in productions, some observers noted a growing reluctance to position him as prominently as before, possibly reflecting concerns about his long-term viability as a traditional masculine lead if such rumors became public knowledge. The psychological impact of this situation on Chandler himself appears to have been significant. Friends and colleagues reported that he became increasingly anxious and stressed in the year before his surgery, displaying a preoccupation with his career prospects and financial security that hadn't been characteristic earlier. This heightened anxiety likely contributed to both his physical health problems, stress being a known factor in back issues, and potentially to his resilience during the subsequent medical crisis. Some who knew Chandler have suggested that the strain of maintaining his public image while fearing exposure of his private life created a psychological burden that may have affected his will to recover during his prolonged hospitalization. While impossible to prove definitively, this theory aligns with medical understanding of how psychological factors can influence recovery from physical trauma, particularly during extended illnesses where a patient's determination can play a crucial role. What makes this aspect of Chandler's story particularly poignant is how differently it might have unfolded in a more accepting era. In contemporary Hollywood, an actor's private life, including gender expression and sexuality, is far less likely to determine their professional opportunities. The pressure Chandler reportedly experienced to conceal this aspect of himself represents a form of institutional cruelty specific to his time, one that potentially contributed to both his declining career and his diminished resilience when facing a life-threatening medical crisis.
I'll take you to dinner and tell you all about myself.
I'd like to hear that. I might tell you a few things, too.
Sounds like a gay evening.
5U Universal Pictures worked him to the bone and didn't stand by him. Throughout Jeff Chandler's career at Universal Pictures, the studio maintained a punishing production schedule that extracted maximum value from their contract stars with minimal concern for long-term well-being. For Chandler, this system created a physically demanding workload that directly contributed to the back problems eventually requiring the fatal surgery. Chandler's contract with Universal exemplified the studio system's exploitative approach to talent management. From the early 1950s through 1961, he appeared in as many as 5 films annually, a grueling pace that allowed minimal recovery time between productions. Many of these roles involved physically demanding action sequences, particularly in the westerns and war films that became his specialty. Riding horses, engaging in fight scenes, and performing moderate stunts were regular requirements, activities that placed constant stress on his spine. They burned him out and buried the ashes, observed one production assistant who worked on several Chandler films during this period. This blunt assessment captures the fundamental dynamic of Chandler's relationship with Universal. Intensive utilization followed by rapid replacement once he was no longer viable as a leading man. The physical toll of this schedule became increasingly evident in Chandler's final years. Crew members from his later films reported that he often arrived on set in visible discomfort, sometimes requiring pain medication just to complete basic scenes. Rather than accommodating these health issues with adjusted shooting schedules or reduced physical demands, Universal reportedly pressured Chandler to continue performing as if unaffected, prioritizing production timelines over his physical well-being. This pattern reflected a broader approach to contract players during Hollywood's studio era. Stars represented significant financial investments for studios, which expected maximum return regardless of personal cost to the performers. For physically imposing male leads like Chandler, whose appeal was partially built on projecting strength and vitality, acknowledging physical limitations was particularly discouraged, creating a culture where injuries were hidden and pain was endured silently. By early 1961, when Chandler's back problems had progressed to the point of requiring surgery, he had already spent years working through increasingly severe pain to fulfill his contractual obligations. The herniated disc that necessitated the operation wasn't a sudden injury, but the culmination of cumulative damage from years of physical strain, damage that might have been prevented or minimized with more reasonable working conditions and appropriate medical intervention at earlier stages. Universal's relationship with Chandler took an even more troubling turn during his hospitalization. While the studio initially issued statements of concern and support, its practical actions told a different story. According to several accounts, Universal executives began recasting Chandler's upcoming projects within days of his surgery, long before his condition became critical. This rapid pivot suggests the studio prioritized production schedules over loyalty to their injured star, moving to protect financial interests even as Chandler fought for his life. Most telling was Universal's response following Chandler's death. While issuing obligatory public statements expressing sadness at the loss of a valued member of the Universal family, the studio's substantive actions were minimal. Unlike the elaborate tributes often arranged for major stars, Universal's commemoration of Chandler was notably restrained, consisting primarily of a small private memorial rather than the more public celebration his career stature might have warranted. The studio's reluctance to embrace Chandler's legacy became even more apparent in the months and years following his death. Universal made little effort to maintain his cultural presence through retrospectives or reissues of his films, standard practices for stars considered important to a studio's heritage. This institutional amnesia effectively accelerated Chandler's fade from public memory, transforming a major star of the 1950s into a relatively minor figure in Hollywood history within just a few years of his death. This pattern of exploitation, followed by abandonment, reveals much about the studio system's fundamentally transactional approach to talent. Universal extracted maximum value from Chandler while he was physically capable of performing, showed minimal investment in his well-being when health issues emerged, and quickly moved to distance itself from his legacy once he was no longer commercially viable. This callous institutional response represents perhaps the final indignity in Chandler's relationship with the studio that had profited so substantially from his work for over a decade. Truth finally emerges. When we integrate all 5 aspects of Jeff Chandler's story, a disturbing pattern emerges that transforms our understanding of his death from a simple medical tragedy to something far more troubling. Chandler's fatal surgery wasn't just an unfortunate accident, but the culmination of a system that exploited him physically, failed him medically, and then worked to conceal the truth about both his life and death. The surgical error that initiated his final crisis occurred in a body already compromised by years of studio-driven overwork. The hospital failures that followed prevented what should have been a survivable complication from being properly addressed. The stress of navigating rumors about his private life potentially weakened his resilience during the prolonged medical battle. And throughout his ordeal, the studio that had profited from his talent for years showed more concern for protecting its investments than supporting its injured star. Most disturbing is how effectively the full truth was suppressed through coordinated action by powerful institutions. The sealed malpractice settlement, minimal press coverage, and studio-managed narrative all worked together to create a sanitized version of events that has persisted for decades, concealing both the preventable nature of Chandler's death and the systemic failures that allowed it to happen. Jeff Chandler's story represents more than just the tragic death of a Hollywood star. It reveals a system that valued image over truth, profit over people, and institutional protection over accountability. The real mystery isn't how Chandler died. The evidence now clearly points to medical negligence compounded by studio exploitation and institutional cover-up. The true mystery is how successfully this reality was hidden from the public for so long, transforming a preventable death into a footnote rather than the scandal it should have been. By understanding the complete truth of Chandler's final chapter, we honor not just his memory, but the importance of questioning sanitized narratives about Hollywood's golden age. Narratives that often conceal far darker realities about how the entertainment industry treated the very stars who built its fortune.